morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Hope you had a great weekend. If you're a Georgia fan, you probably did. Boy, how much impressive stuff do we see from an array of Georgia athletics teams. We'll celebrate a lot of that on the program today. John Stinchcomb also stops by. We have an interesting recruiting note to give you here on the program, too. So much ground to cover. But to kick things off today, at the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, we'll be talking about this probably for a couple of days. There is one thing in particular I want to address today. Incredibly candid remarks from a couple of former Georgia key leaders about what they saw as some offensive issues for Georgia this past season. And I think there is a probably simple takeaway that those of us who are Georgia fans and then kind of participate in a Georgia football conversation, I think there is a simple takeaway that we should have on all of that. I'm going to give it to you here off the very top of the program today. I'm really happy to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of the rules I try to follow when I'm putting our show together here is the basic notion that simple is almost always better. If you can make a simple point about something, you are usually making a point that has the ability to kind of resonate a little bit more clearly than something that's far too complicated. This may be because I'm just not very smart, but whatever it is, we've sort of found that simple works best. And so today, we're going to make a simple point about kind of the current state of affairs for Georgia football just prior to the start of spring practice as the, I guess, sort of final remnants of the 2024 season kind of take shape. Guys from that team make their way onto the NFL. We're going to use a couple of things that were sort of said this past weekend to allow us to kind of give you sort of a simple state of affairs for where Georgia football is. And in doing so, we believe that we can kind of create a sort of a sense of unity. Listen, I'm not all that stressed out when people occasionally are kind of debating and discussing and arguing when it comes to sports. That is how, in a lot of ways, we show our love for sports. The way we show love for sports is by arguing about it. That's why sports talk kind of exists. Now it's on YouTube and podcasts. It's been, radio, TV. You still do a lot of that with like Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless and, that type of stuff. Although Skip, I guess, not on TV anymore. But you get my point that the way in which sports fans show their love for sports is by arguing about sports. So if Georgia fans are even this time of year arguing with each other, that can, to a certain extent, get a little bit annoying. I do get that, especially when people try to make the same argument over and over again ad nauseum. That can maybe get a little bit annoying. But there is an aspect of just sports fans getting together on an online platform and just sort of having it out and arguing. This is just sort of what we do. It's our pastime. It's our way of showing, love and appreciation for the sport in question, whatever it might be. In our case, it's Georgia football. So for the most part, I'm not too stressed out by Georgia fans arguing. But in the midst of sort of a Georgia fan argument, if you can find something that's like sort of an 80 or 90% issue, something that everybody can agree on, well, that's probably a pretty valuable thing to do. So we're going to use the words of a couple of Georgia players, former Georgia players now, to help get us to that point. I want to start with Tate Ratledge. So Ratledge obviously was kind of a story from the NFL Scouting Combine this weekend. By the way, what a showing for these Georgia offensive linemen. Ratledge, Jared Wilson, among the most athletic offensive linemen we've seen in recent memory. We're not really surprised about that. We even said this, a couple of weeks ago that Wilson was in his own right was going to sort of test off the charts. We knew he'd be fast. We knew he'd be, twitchier than the typical offensive lineman. Tate kind of very much sort of the same way on all of that. These Georgia offensive linemen having a chance to be really athletic. So it seems like, as we predicted, and we had even had some topics about this, about how some of the scouts were really liking what they were seeing from the Georgia offensive linemen in particular, kind of running a little bit counter to how the group perhaps performed collectively here this year, where even by their own admission, the Georgia offensive line just didn't really have a great season. And when your offensive line struggles, all of a sudden your offense overall is going to struggle. And that was the nature of things for Georgia, that based on its own championship standard, based on what was kind of required to get the job done at certain times this year, the Georgia offense just wasn't great. So what do we make of that? And to kind of go along with the idea of fans and their discussions and their debates and their arguments with each other, who gets the blame for all of this? Well, Tate Ratledge, one of the most important Georgia leaders of all, one of the most effective spokesmen for Georgia overall, had a lot to say, some very blunt language about where he thinks the blame lies when it comes to Georgia's offensive struggles this past year. This was stated this weekend. I find this to be incredibly candid and remarkably interesting. This is Tate Ratledge on the subject of the Georgia offensive line and how that impacted the Georgia offense overall.
If you watch that film, most of it's on us. It's not coaching. It's execution, taking the right steps, little things. And so I think a lot of our success, or not having success last year, was more so on the players, and that starts up front with us. And everybody knows we didn't have our best year, and we take full accountability for that.
Isn't that interesting? That's Ratledge from the Combine saying, hey, this is not on the coaches, this is on the players. He says, we didn't have our best season, and we all take full accountability for that. Now, let me tell you one of the reasons why I think that's interesting. We're going to hear from another Georgia player in a moment who kind of gives you sort of a, sort of a similar vibe on all of that, which is that this is in many ways their job interview. And if you've ever had a job interview, you know you want to kind of put your your best face on. You want to kind of put yourself in the best possible light. A job interview is your chance to sell yourself. So if there was ever a moment, you might think, where you could spin a scenario to make yourself look better at the expense of somebody else, either your coaches or your fellow teammates, whatever else, then in a situation like this, the NFL scouting combine, it might stand to reason that that's what you might do and try to spin your performance in such a way to say, hey, well, I was actually better than you realize, or this was different than you realize. Hey, there's a lot going on. You could sell yourself differently. You could, and maybe a lesser person might be tempted to sidestep some of the need for accountability and responsibility that Tate Ratledge takes head on right there. You might be willing to do that in a situation. Some people might. But the fact that a guy like Tate Ratledge doesn't, I think, is pretty telling. The fact that in the midst of an evaluation of himself personally, as he gets ready to move on to the NFL, Ratledge, when he has a chance to kind of point the finger of blame somewhere else, says, no, put it right here on me, put it right here on our teammates. Even though I believe I can be a great NFL player, I acknowledge that me and my teammates did not quite get it done as well as we could collectively as a group this past year. I just think that's really, really telling. Now, let me tell you right now what I'm not going to do, though. What I'm not going to do is use Ratledge's words as like a cudgel to attack those who were questioning the coaching performance of whether it be Mike Bobo as offensive coordinator or Stacey Searles as offensive line coach. When Georgia performs the way that it did this past season, admittedly deficient at time on a per-game basis, season-long stats, individual moments. You can look at a lot of moments in which, Georgia just was less than it perhaps should be. Here's what I'm here to believe and tell you. All questions should be on the table. Is Georgia recruiting the right players? Is it recruiting the right kinds of players, body type-wise? Did the coaches get the job done? Is there some sort of overarching philosophy from Kirby Smart that impacts all of this? When the results are less than they should be, I think that every question should be on the table. And sometimes I think that people get really, I don't know, there's a lot of energy, sometimes it's negative energy around like coaching performance and, criticizing fans who wonder, if the coach could have done a better job or if you could have gotten a better coaching performance with a different guy. There's all that kind of stuff out there. But I honestly believe that it should all be on the table in terms of discussion, what's okay to talk about, what's okay to wonder about, to kind of pontificate or hypothesize, use a bunch of big words. It should all be open for discussion. But in the case of Tate Ratledge, he says, don't put this on the coaches, put this on us. And once again, while I don't think any fan is unfair in, kind of wondering what role the coaches play, whether it be Searles, the offensive line coach, Bobo as offensive coordinator, I don't think that fans are wrong for wondering what role they might have played in the overall disappointments of the Georgia offense here in 2024. I do think it's telling that someone that was in that and a part of it, whose Georgia career is now done, who seemingly is free to say whatever he wants, and in a NFL job interview type situation might be tempted to want to put himself in the best possible light, the fact that he still wants to own that responsibility and he still wants to own that accountability, I guess I take that pretty seriously. I would suggest that maybe you should too. Beyond that, Ratledge wasn't the only guy to talk that way here this past weekend. Trevor Etienne kind of much the same way, because if you think about it, so the Georgia offensive line has its problems, and that then creates an issue for the Georgia running game. We saw probably less success in the Georgia running game than we have seen in a very, very long time. And once again, given a chance to paint himself in the best possible light, maybe excuse, point fingers, and sort of deflect attention elsewhere, much the same way that Tate Ratledge stepped up and took full responsibility for everything that happened with the offense this year. A guy like Trevor Etienne did very much the same thing. Now, this is a couple of clips mashed together, but it's the same topic of Etienne kind of owning his role and the player's role overall in what we saw from the Georgia offense in this particular case, in the really lack of running game at times for Georgia this past season. Here's Trevor Etienne striking a very similar tone to what we just heard from Tate Ratledge.
I mean, I feel like at Georgia, something we struggled with this season was execution. And if you go back and look at a lot of those games, we were trailing at times. So it's kind of hard to run the ball when you kind of need a touchdown desperately. So that's probably part of the reason, if I had to say any specific reason. I say definitely, and I'll point the finger at myself. I just feel like this year my eye discipline wasn't the best, on certain runs. It's certain things that I could have done to help in many different ways, which I feel like kind of killed the production of the run game. And, it's just going back, like I said, about myself being more consistent. I feel like I could have helped in that aspect.
We'll take two more.
So I think that's really strong from Trevor Etienne saying, hey, my individual performance, my eye discipline could have been better. I could have made different decisions. And the fact that Georgia did face some early deficits, he says, that took away our ability to run the football. That's one of the reasons why that was missing. So once again, a certain aspect of kind of personal accountability from Etienne there to go along, or Etienne there to go along with what Tate Ratledge said a moment ago. So here is where I want to kind of bring everybody together. And here is where I think we hopefully can find sort of a common consensus here for a moment. Not everybody agrees with what Georgia should do next to sort of fix some of the problems that it has. But no matter where you kind of land on that perspective, if you think that some fans are being too hysterical about it, or if you think some fans are being too passive about it, wherever you happen to be on one side or the other, here's what I think you should take some comfort in. And here's the part of this I don't think you should miss. Whether it's, Etienne and Ratledge and guys like that trying to own their responsibility for all of this or whatever else. Everybody does seem to agree on one thing. Everybody seems to agree that things weren't as good as they could be. And I'm here to tell you, that's not nothing. That we may have differing opinions on what the solution is to what maybe kept Georgia from being more in the national championship picture in 2024. We may have differing opinions on those solutions. But nobody seems to have a differing opinion about the nature of the problem. Georgia needs to be better offensively. And the fact that a guy like Ratledge can speak about that so clearly at the NFL Scouting Combine, I think got to take some value in that. No matter what you think about Ratledge's assessment of, well, it's on us as players, whatever else, the fact that when asked about some offensive issues, he didn't say, what? What are you talking about? I thought we were fine. I thought we played well. Sometimes Kirby Smart has said stuff like that. But in this particular case, Ratledge didn't say that at all. Etienne didn't say that at all. And that's pretty reflective of some of the other stuff we've heard in the aftermath of the loss to Notre Dame and the kind of way in which the season ended, the start of the offseason. We have heard what seems to be a pretty clear consensus that Georgia needs to be better offensively. So I take some value in that, especially that now we're on the doorstep of Georgia getting ready to begin its spring practice. That the way in which Georgia gets better, some of you would say it's got to be better coaches. Some of you said it needs to be different coaches. Some of you have said it needs to be either the current players playing better or an upgrade in some of the kinds of players that are in the room. All kinds of opinions that are out there, and sports fans kind of shouting at each other back and forth on that. That's just sort of part of what makes sports fun. I'm kind of here for all of that. I'm certainly not bothered by it or intimidated by any of it. There's all kinds of thoughts about what the solution is. But there seems to be universal agreement on the problem. Georgia didn't score enough points. It didn't gain enough yards to create points. It didn't have enough balance between its passing game and its running game. It just simply wasn't good enough offensively. So as you get ready to move towards 2025 spring practice and then a couple of months after that, the start of the 2025 season, we don't know if it's necessarily going to be better for this upcoming season. Whether you think it is or you think it isn't, you can't be sure. But the fact that everybody seemingly is in agreement that it's a problem that needs to be fixed, that's the kind of thing I think that Georgia fans ought to take some comfort in here today. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. So glad you're with us. Whether it's video across all platforms, live at 10 a.m., and really like 99.9% of the people, it's an on-demand product after the fact. Whatever your way of getting with this on video, live, or after the fact, we just really appreciate our podcast audience as well, Apple and Spotify. And I got a really nice message on X this weekend confirming what we sort of felt like we knew for sure. We've got a real issue on our Apple podcast player. It's a dumb thing. It's a little thing, but it's impacting the way in which the episodes show up for you on your feed, and it's making them it's more complicated than I want to get into right here, but we know it's not we know we're not serving our Apple podcast player, like our RSS feed's not serving that as well as it could be right now. It's all out of whack. I do believe that we're going to be able to get that fixed, I think maybe even this week. So I appreciate your patience. If you know people who listen on Apple, let them know that we know we've got a problem. Someone was nice enough to tell me that she reached out a different way. In other words, she sought out the podcast a different way because she had a feeling it was probably there. It's just not showing up in the feed the way that it's supposed to be. Super complicated, but we're working to get that fixed, and I certainly am apologetic for that. And, of course, our radio audience, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, how much fun did they have on the Ref this weekend with the Georgia baseball games and the sweep of Florida Gulf Coast, that coming up here in a moment. So love that. We're on with them every afternoon at noon. You're always happy about all of that. Just a lot of ways for you to get with our program. We're thankful that you've chosen one that works for you. We're also thankful to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia, who make it all possible. Now, we talk about Pella all the time. Energy-efficient windows and doors, that's what they're all about. They're also a major part of the community here in Georgia. And coming up over the course of the really the next month or so, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to kind of get out and interact with our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. In fact, this weekend, one of the big events of the year, it's the Atlanta Home Show at the Cobb Galleria. That's taking place this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, March 7th through the 9th. Our friends at Pella are going to be there. I'd love to, if you're planning on being there already, or if you're thinking about going, I'd love to have you go. Stop by the Pella booth that's there and just tell them thank you for being a part of our show. Honestly, their support, they've been with us for a long time, really almost as long as anybody now. Just good folks, good people. They offer a great product and service in our community too. But please just stop by and say thank you for them for what they do for us, and take some time to check out why those Pella windows and doors are just so universally appreciated as kind of a market leader in this space for making your home feel good on the inside, looking good on the outside. Why so many homeowners, when they know it's time to upgrade and take the best possible care of their home that they can, why they are looking at those Pella windows and doors as a way to do that. Also, the Sip and Swine Barbecue Festival is coming up March 7th and 8th at Coolray Field. That's a fun spot. It's free admission, free parking, so easy to come by and be a part of that. That area over there at Cool Ray Field's always a lot of fun. So please stop by and see them there on that. And don't forget, right now when it comes to Pella, great savings. How about $750 off your project, 0% APR for 36 months too. So you got some great savings opportunities. So make sure you check them out on that website to go to PellaGA.com/DawgNation. PellaGA.com/DawgNation. And give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is going beyond. All right, we're going to get John Stinchcomb here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, let's go around the doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And we got so much to celebrate when it comes to UGA athletics here this weekend. First of all, Georgia goes on the road to Austin. Stop me if you've heard this before. And from wire to wire, pillar to post, dominates Texas and gets a great road win. Not football season, although as the chant goes, just like football, that's exactly what Georgia does at Texas on Saturday. This was a huge win for UGA. Honestly, for a team that's been a little bit erratic this year, and we'll call it like it is on that, to follow up kind of a dramatic home game. We got the crowd behind you. You play probably a higher level of basketball than you've been playing for the most part. And then now have to go on the road to a team that Joe Lunardi had in his tournament field and then essentially play better on the road, kind of pairing back-to-back performances like that. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but that clearly looks like a two-game performance for Georgia, unlike what we've kind of really seen perhaps since the Kentucky-Oklahoma two-step to begin the SEC play, and both those were home games. Georgia playing this way in back-to-back games, perhaps this is at least the chance a team really coming together and playing its best basketball, you would hope anyway, at the exact right time of the year. And I loved it's a busy weekend for me like it is for many of you. I'm running around doing all kinds of things. My kids are involved in a million stuff, so I'm following all this in social media. And all the Georgia fans, we're going to do some of this later on for our Golden Shoe, but all the Georgia fans enjoying the fact that it has been a very rude welcoming into the SEC by Georgia to our friends from Texas, and I cannot get enough of that. I love all of that. A fun team to beat is Texas on the road. But I'll show you this on the screen coming from Joe Lunardi. That's the guy who essentially invented bracketology. So after Georgia's win, because keep in mind, coming into the weekend, Georgia was among the first four out, and Texas was among the last four in. Well, now that Georgia's gone on the road and gotten the win against Texas, all of a sudden Georgia kind of just barely, but still nonetheless in. Joe Lunardi has the Dogs in his tournament field right now, along with Arkansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, as sort of those final four teams in the NCAA tournament field, with Boise State, Xavier, North Carolina, Texas, along with Wake Forest, SMU, Cincinnati, Villanova, so kind of competing for those final spots there right now. So it's probably not a given or a guarantee for Georgia as of yet. In other words, it may not be a great idea to go 0 for 2 in your final two regular season games, South Carolina and Vanderbilt here. It might not be great to go 0 for 2 in those. But, boy, if you could find yourself at least one of those two wins coming up against the Commodores and the Gamecocks, if you could find at least one win there, you might just start feeling pretty good about your chances. We warned you last week, got to be really careful kind of relying too much on the SEC tournament unless you just win the whole thing. The committee has a history of not really paying very much attention to that. So the work that you do needs to be done in the regular season. But Georgia kind of getting the big one that it needed, beating at least a tournament-level team on the road in Texas, that might be enough to get Georgia in on all of this. And by the way, not to be outdone, women's basketball team, the Lady Dogs, they also go on the road. We'll show you this here. They go on the road and pull an upset at number 11, Tennessee. A lot of attention paid to this weekend. So a kind of a nice conclusion of the regular season for the Lady Dogs. By the way, I love that Lady Dogs logo, too. That's sort of the script G with the basketball in the middle of it. It's a cool logo. But Lady Dogs get the win against Tennessee, getting ready for the SEC tournament. You're very happy for them. Softball team did lose yesterday, but they got a walk-off win against Ohio State on Saturday as a part of like a little local tournament they were running there. So mostly a good weekend, although I guess they were maybe disappointed to lose to the Buckeyes yesterday. And then the Diamond Dawgs, the baseball team, continues to stay hot. Got a 4-game sweep against Florida Gulf Coast. One of them was a one. Let's see if I can speak English here. One of those games was a run rule. The other 3 were all kind of walk-off, final at-bat type wins for Georgia over the program known as Dunk City in basketball. They were kind of frisky on social media. That had Georgia fans fired up. But the fact that Georgia, who's still, I think, kind of trying to figure out its pitching situation a little bit, not trying to figure it out, but they're not quite in their weekend rhythm yet with their weekend starters, things like that, kind of building themselves some early deficits, coming from behind. That sounds a little bit like the football team. But getting the job done over and over. And some of the sort of, some of the teams that Georgia's play, whether it be Wilmington or Gulf Coast, these are sort of, mid-majors that are like NCAA level, programs that they could be in NCAA regionals, later on this spring. So all in all, I think you have to say thus far, dramatic certainly, but a good start to the Georgia baseball season. In fact, let me let you hear from baseball coach Wes Johnson on how he views what the Diamond Dawgs have been able to do and whether or not he's concerned about the fact that these thrilling comebacks have been necessary based on some early deficits. This was Johnson from the weekend.
I think we're still learning a lot. I scheduled so many games early to try to figure out a lot about our team, so I think we're getting there. I think the other thing, when you're playing a team like, guys, this team right here is going to push for their conference championship. They're really good, man. They give you, the thing about teams, what you're seeing with a lot of your mid-major teams now is they're giving you a lot of different looks off the mound that you may or may not see in SEC play. The SEC's got a little more power to it at times, but you're not going to see a guy with, I can talk about the guy who closed the game for him last night, or didn't close it. He was actually second to last pitcher. That guy pitches in our league, man. 100%. He was 90 to 94 with a really, really good slider and curveball. I go through 4 or 5 of their arms that, would pitch in our league. So you go through it, and their first 5 hitters are really, really good. It's just a sign of where baseball is. You got to play clean. Got to have good approach to play, and if you do that, you'll have a chance.
I like that from Wes Johnson. I think that Johnson's good at how he talks about baseball. I think he's interesting. And honestly, you sort of heard some kids in the background there too. If you haven't been out to Foley Field, especially on a Sunday, oftentimes a really fun time to be there. They do some good stuff for you at the end. And my experience is the players all really interactive. If sometimes in sports, it's sort of getting harder to get close to the team that you cheer for. But in a place like, college baseball, Georgia baseball in particular, I think there's still a lot of room for that. And just kind of a really great weekend, I think, there at Foley Field. And great to see the Diamond Dawgs continuing to win. We'll make that around the doghouse here today, presented by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And boy, I tell you this, speaking of baseball, I did a lot of baseball this weekend. My son's playing at these long weekends at the ballpark. Then you come home and, literally, I'm not even playing. I'm just watching. But you're kind of tired when you get home. You're kind of worn out a little bit. And I tell you, when I get back home, you kind of plop down on the couch. The thing that I'm always sort of reaching for to kind of get that little break, that little recharge, just that nice little treat after a busy day of whatever it is you might be doing, is the delicious one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. It's obviously a huge part of our college football season. And frankly, it's a big part of everything we do all year round. I just think it's fun to take with you, to have with you, wait when you get home, put it in the cooler, just tasting great and feeling good, and just a fun part of everything that we're doing here. And by the way, don't forget, there's great new flavor for you to enjoy there as well. If you love the really cool stuff that Dr. Pepper's been doing as of late, we think you might love the brand new Dr. Pepper Blackberry flavor. It's a really special new introduction by Dr. Pepper. They've been really creative with some of these flavors in the past. We think that Blackberry is going to be an awesome choice for you. A lot of people really are having a good time with that, and we think that you can enjoy it as well. So as you're shopping at your local Kroger, wherever you're doing your shopping, make sure you pick up some Dr. Pepper Blackberry, Dr. Pepper Blackberry Zero Sugar today, or whatever flavor of Dr. Pepper you enjoy. It's a pepper thing. Dr. Pepper, a big part of Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily. All right, we've got a recruiting update to give you before we're done. News from the SEC there as well, and another spring game coming to a close. So and coming to an end apparently this year. We'll give you more details on all of that. But for now, what was said by Georgia players at the NFL Scouting Combine. How about an update on what happened this past week for Georgia? Big kind of get together, the big winter board meeting. John Stinchcomb part of that. Let's cover all of that ground and more as a part of DawgNation Daily presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia as we bring on John Stinchcomb here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me bring in John Stinchcomb to what we were just discussing. And, John, we're obviously a football show. That's what pays the bills around here. But I did really notice this weekend a lot of people on social media, because this time of year it seems like I'm following a lot of this stuff on social media because, like everybody else, I'm running around doing things all the time. It seems like people were having a really good time with the variety of Georgia sports that did well. Lady Dogs, big upset over Tennessee. Softball, I know they lost on Sunday, but they had to walk off on Saturday. Diamond Dawgs take the 4-game sweep over Florida Gulf Coast. Football players doing well at the NFL Scouting Combine. Perhaps most prominently, Georgia getting the win it maybe really, really needed to give itself a real strong chance of being in the NCAA tournament field. There was a lot of different things happening for Georgia athletics this weekend, almost all of it seemingly positive. I know how much you enjoy all of that. How much fun was it to see the other teams all kind of having nice moments, sort of right there around the same time?
And that's been the hope for Georgia forever, right? Is why can't we be dominant across all the sports? And I'm thankful, BA. I was able to be at the basketball game where we upset Florida and watch all the fans storm the court appropriately after 90 seconds of letting the refs and the Gators get off the court. That was awesome. Friday, got up there and watched the Diamond Dawgs. At the time, they were down, 5 runs at the end of the first, but able to rally back. And it's just a great time to be a dog. And so many positive things happening. It's fun and exciting. And, the new facilities certainly help for that fan experience to be a really good one, especially when the product's nice.
Yeah, I mean, and total candor. I mean, like I said before, we have a job to do here. We obviously will always be talking 90-ish% football just because the interest in football is so high. But when you can sprinkle in the other sports, what happens is, basketball can take you through March, if you're good enough, into April. Baseball can take you, into the middle part of June. And all of a sudden there, kind of the back half of the year from the sort of college athletic academic calendar, all of a sudden – that's just a lot more robust time where, if you don't have the successful teams, other sport, from a Georgia perspective anyway, just sort of nothing. Now, the trick for Georgia is that in the Atlanta area, there's always Braves getting ready to start, Masters right around the corner. There are other sports things happening that can take some of the oxygen out of the UGA athletics conversation. But for those of us who really like the red and black, who really like Georgia, I mean, my gosh, think about how much more full the dance card is when you do have March Madness to perhaps look forward to, when you have the possibility of a trip to Omaha looming for the baseball team, how much longer your interest in sort of UGA athletics continues. It's just kind of a nice thing for Georgia fans who kind of want to get involved with that.
I like the way you think, BA. We're looking at ways to fill our entertainment calendar between Georgia football games.
That's right.
From the end of the one season to the start of the next, how can we be entertained? And, I think the product continues to be produced at a higher and higher level. I think that's the expectation as a Georgia fan is, even for sports that we may not consistently watch. I've seen the equestrian team from once or twice, or the softball team. And, that's probably not my well-worn beaten path, but it's nice to be able to have some pretty cool events to go to and enjoy. And anytime the G is being represented and representing well, it's fun to watch. And, tennis is entertaining. There's new facilities there. And obviously softball got an upgrade. So I think it's always important to continue to produce a good product and make sure that fan engagement and entertainment is at the forefront, because that's a big piece of sports. And like UBA, it may not be the main focus, but it sure is fun when Georgia represents itself well.
So I want to shift gears to something else. You are a part of the UGA Athletic Board. A lot of people may not always know kind of what this is, but last week, I think it was last week, you guys got together for like the winter meeting, which gives Josh Brooks and the other people a chance to kind of give a lay of the land of, here's what's looming in the future. Here's what we've kind of just been through. A lot of this ends up being about money, of course. We've heard certainly about the continuation of G-Day, which I think people were pretty happy about. But beyond that, can you give us a little bit of an idea of what came out last week at the winter board meeting for the UGA Athletic Board?
Yeah, for me, I think one of the bigger takeaways is the addition of 100 scholarships spread out across the sports. Obviously, with the House ruling pending in April and then possibly going into effect in July, there's so much that changes across the college landscape. I think the fact that facilities-wise, for a time, it felt like every different sport was being touched with a renovation, and now that that's kind of settled, I think there's only one project that is ongoing currently. Having just been to Foley Field and seen the renovations of the baseball field, I think those are very positive. Same thing for tennis, softball, a lot of great facility upgrades. But really for student athletes, I think understanding how this landscape has changed. There's revenue sharing that's going to come down the pike, and you're looking at 18, 20 plus million that the school can share now with student athletes. I think that's revolutionary as to where we once were and where we're going. Those were all big pieces and news items that were coming out of that board meeting, and I'm sure this summer we'll have even more once the House ruling is confirmed and we have a better understanding of what that looks like for NIL deals and collectives and how it gets dispersed across the sports and how it affects recruiting and all those various pieces. But at least there seems to be some stabilization, if you will, and better understanding of where we're at and what we can do from an athletic department standpoint moving forward.
So when you talk about adding scholarships, my understanding is that kind of comes from the same revenue sharing number that you're kind of dividing amongst the sports. And so it seems like obviously football is going to get the lion's share of that because it makes the most money. You've got men's basketball getting its thing. Women's basketball is there too. And then the other sports sort of, I hate to say it like this, sort of fighting for what's left over. Contentious is the wrong word here, but I can't think of a different word to use. How contentious do you think it is, or how much debate internally do you think exists about kind of how that pie sort of gets chopped up? Everybody obviously wants more, but there's only so much to go around. Like I said, I'm using the word contentious. I don't mean in sort of an arguing sense. I just sort of more mean in kind of the ongoing debate about this. How much certainty and agreement do you think there is about exactly how all this money should be spread around?
Well, everyone has their opinion, and everyone continues to pass the buck. So the NCAA has refused to regulate or speak to how that's going to get parsed out, as did conferences. At one point, the SEC was going to kind of stabilize and homogenize how each school was to break out their rev share with the players and across the sports. And as my understanding at this point, that doesn't occur. So each school will have to decide how to rev share. And there will be some difficult conversations. And this is the hybridization of a capitalist and socialist approach, where socialist is, all ships are going to rise and everyone has that opportunity. And despite the fact that we all recognize football is the primary breadwinner and revenue generator, it also has provided the opportunity for 21 sports across all of Georgia athletics. As that's a great opportunity. That's kind of the socialist piece. But when you look at the whole genesis of NIL and the reason why players wanted to get paid is they're going, we help create this revenue, and we want something in return more than what we're getting at this point. And primarily what we're talking about is football and men's basketball were the flag bearers for that cause, because that's where the revenue was being generated. So because we live in this weird world of a little bit capitalist, a little bit socialist in our approach, there's going to be some difficult conversations. And I think at the end of the day, you're not going to please everyone, but I think having a solid foundation for the reasoning behind why the rev split is the way that it is going to be really important, because there's going to be a lot of explaining to do and a lot of difficult situations as to why this team is getting more and this team isn't.
One more thing on this particular topic, then I want to ask you about something else. You used a word a moment ago, stabilize. Did you get any sense from the winter board meeting, from the people you talked to, whether it be on the record, off the record, whatever else, that there is some stability coming? Does anybody see light at the end of the tunnel? Because we've endured change, and throughout all of this, we've been bracing for even more change, and in some cases, calamitous change. Did you get any sense that, hey, one more corner to go around, one more dark tunnel to climb through, and then after that, everything can kind of settle down, we can get back to the business, just sort of running college athletics again? Did you get any sense that stability might be on its way?
Well, I think the ruling, the House case certainly helps to set a little bit of a clearer direction for college athletics. With that said, I mean, we're still in turbulent times, if you will. I think this helps. I think there are steps in place to help stabilize, but it's not stable. It's very dynamic. It's very fluid. And I think it's hard for everyone. As I've talked to people in the athletic department, the challenge is many of those roles that were pretty redundant have now been shifted, and fundraising has become part of almost everyone's task across the athletic department, which is a bizarre concept, but it is where we find ourselves. And because players are looking at their opportunities more of a fund generating, a revenue generating opportunity, unlike it ever has been in the past, it's changed some things. So I do think there is some answers to many of the various questions and challenges that athletic departments face in the current landscape, but there isn't a firm ground. At least there's a couple of anchor points now that you can grab onto and feel like at least we know how to address certain situations moving forward in the short term. But BA, to be honest with you, I think there's still so much more for them to iron out. And they don't know where the power lies, especially because of all the litigation that has existed and we're about to create. I think the fact that we're talking about rev sharing and the memo that came out in Congress in December, which was then kind of retracted because of the political change, if you will, that there is still so much turbulence across college athletics that I would be inaccurate to use the word stable on just about anything that's going on with all of college athletics.
Let me finish with a couple of brief topics here for a moment. We talked about some comments from Tate Ratledge a little earlier. I'll get to that in a second. But as a former offensive lineman yourself, when you see Tate and really probably Jared Wilson maybe most prominently, can you believe how athletic offensive linemen have become? Now, we had pretty good sense that Wilson was going to run off the charts. He was just always sort of thought to be kind of a very high-level athlete. Even before he was playing at Georgia, that was sort of known about him. Ratledge, tests among the best there too. Just the way in which, and you're seeing not just Georgia players in some respects doing this, but obviously Georgia players pretty prominently, where like the big guys, both offensive and defensive linemen, they're just more athletic than they've ever been. It really is. just kind of breaking the boundaries of what we sort of typically thought possible for human achievement in some respects.
Yeah, and I think it has a lot to do with the training that you receive. Now, there's a lot of focus on the drills that measure, quote unquote, athleticism. So the way that Georgia guys tested or are testing currently is super impressive. Jared Wilson and Tate, both sub 5-second 40s, which usually would be super noteworthy. There was a number of other players who achieved that. Same thing with their verticals and their broad jumps, their 3-cone drill, the 20-yard shuttle. I mean, they're crushing these numbers. And obviously, hats off to them individually. But I think if you look at the bigger picture, I think you see some of the training and specialization and off-season work that these guys are putting in, recognizing that a couple tenths, a couple of hundredths can really translate into more money down the road and better opportunities. I think that goes to show that there is opportunities there. There is some awareness that and resources. These guys have had the money to be able to hire these trainers and go to these places. I remember Cedric Von Granger, when he came back one year, he was able to take some of the other guys before spring ball during spring break to go train specifically. So I think that's a big piece of it, but obviously their athleticism was on full display this week, and I think they really helped themselves. So that's always good to see Dogs representing themselves and our Georgia G in the best light.
We also heard from Tate Ratledge a little earlier, kind of owning on behalf of his other, I guess, offensive lineman teammates, some of the struggles that Georgia had this year, not wanting to put that on coaches, whether it be Stacey Searles for the offensive line performance or Mike Bobo for the offensive performance overall, kind of taking that personal responsibility. And the point that I made a little earlier was, I said, if I'm a Georgia fan, the thing I take some comfort in is that everybody seems to agree that there was a problem and sort of what the problem was. Georgia needs to play better offensively. There's all kinds of debate and discussion what the solution to that problem should be, and some of that's just sort of the nature of sports talk, sports fans getting together and enjoying the kind of banter back and forth. But for fans who just want Georgia to be better, the fact that there seems to be universal agreement that things this past year weren't as good as they could be, I take some comfort in that. What do you make from the fact that somebody like Ratledge in a kind of a job interview situation and, other Georgia players doing a similar thing were willing to say, hey, the performance of our guys on the field this year could have been better? What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think leaders lead, and Tate Ratledge, whether it's Kirby Smart talking about him or other players talking about Tate, and really just the leadership in general from a player's perspective, has always been a strong suit. And for him to take ownership, I think that shows the selfless nature and character of him personally, and then that is being instilled in the identity of Georgia football. So for all of us as players, it's self-evaluation and ownership of your own stuff. And this past year didn't hit the mark. And the fact that Tate recognizes that and takes ownership, I think speaks to his character and the character and identity of the leadership within that locker room that we saw on full display. Jalen Walker has done the same thing throughout the season. And when you've got guys like that are super talented, but also willing to take ownership and not pass the buck and put blame in other places, I think that speaks to a really healthy culture. We all know that Georgia's offense needs to perform better, and coaches and players alike. And I think that is a good opportunity rather than a threat when you realize that you've got talent and you've got good leadership and guys that can buy in. And Tate has embodied that.
John, I tell you what, I just appreciate it so much. Great information, great thoughts. Thank you for all of that. We'll look forward to also getting a chance to speak to you back here very soon on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. I really appreciate your time.
Always enjoy it. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So I've said this before, and this is not meant to be a criticism of Kirby Smart, but if you ask Kirby a question, ask a player the same question, oftentimes you just get a much more honest answer from the players. And listen, sometimes players don't want to talk to the media, which, I guess is their prerogative. That doesn't bother me. And so therefore, if they really don't want to talk, they're going to say just enough to kind of get by. What's the old line about, I'm just here so I don't get fined? Every now and then you hear from some players, and it's sort of, hey, I'm just here to just say just the bare minimum of stuff, and then my 10 minutes are up, and I'm going back to be with my teammates, which is their prerogative. I don't have a beef with that. Their job is to play football, not talk about football necessarily. But when they do take time to think about the questions and give answers, oftentimes they're just far more, I would say, honest or candid. You ask Kirby about the offense, after the Notre Dame game, he's saying, you play a tough schedule. I think we have done a lot of good things well. And there's just an element of that doesn't ring true. And I think for some fans, it makes you a little nervous. Like, wait a second, is this really his assessment of the situation? Does he really think that everything's fine? Well, we have reason to believe that a lot of what's discussed behind closed doors, perhaps a little bit different than the public nature of some of those comments. And when players are as honest and candid as they are, it needs to be better. Oh, yeah, we could have done this better. We could have executed better. We could have. When they are saying that, I think the reason why you perhaps should like that is because that's probably a little bit more of a reflection from the very honest talk they're hearing from inside the football facility, sometimes not perfectly reflected by what's said on the outside in kind of public comment. So just something to consider. All right, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And for a moment here, can I talk about something that I think is really, really fun about Royal Caribbean? I like to travel. I like going places. I like immersive experiences. Like my family, we've always liked going to like theme parks, things like that. I like to just sort of be immersed in kind of a well-themed environment. One of the things I love about Royal Caribbean right now is how well they are doing that thing with so many of the restaurant concepts on the ship. I was reading about this a little earlier, that, obviously specialty restaurants, we've had those before. People like various dining options on ships, and Royal Caribbean's been great about creating those sort of opportunities. But now this is going beyond just sort of a classic good meal with great service. This has now become kind of a well-themed experience. On board Utopia of the Seas, one of the things you have is the Royal Railway, which is, it's amazing. It's a deck of the ship. It's been kind of designed to look like a rail car, and you enter it like it's a rail car, and you're kind of like walking through a train station to get on the rail car. And you're sitting down, you're having a really good dinner, but it's a fun dinner. It's not just good food, it's a fun dinner with a simulation type experience that's like you're on a rail car in the Old West riding down, the train tracks. It turns into a really fun show. You've also got the various supper clubs on board the Icon class of ships, where it's like the supper club concept is one of the most popular things in like Las Vegas right now. They're bringing whether it be a New York style supper club or Chicago style supper club or a Hollywood style supper club, they're kind of bringing these where you're kind of having dinner, delicious, intimate environment with like the jazz band playing, are really fun. I've told you before, Mason Jar, one of my favorite restaurants on board the ship, with the Southern style food, the bourbon cocktails, the country music, live band playing, just an awesome experience. Jessica Slater is a great travel agent. She can tell you all about it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She can tell you everything about all the fun stuff going on with Royal Caribbean here as we roll through 2025. Speaking of that, let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean right now. I want to give you a recruiting note. So do you know who Caden Prothro is? I was really impressed with Prothro, and it seems like every year there's a version of this. A couple of years ago it was DeMello Jones. This past year, Caden Prothro, where somebody really kind of shows out during the state championship game in a way that, obviously you already kind of knew most of these prospects were good players, but they sort of show you something that's like a little bit extra. When DeMello took on Prince Avenue a couple of years ago, I came away thinking DeMello Jones was an even better player than I realized. I would say that Prothro this past year, a little bit like that for me, where we're paying attention to a lot of tight ends right now, Mark Bowman and others. But Prothro, man, whether it's as a receiver or as a tight end, this is just a really, really dynamic athlete. And it's the kind of guy that Georgia almost always seems to be in the mix for. Obviously, Todd Hartley gets a ton of credit for that. So I bring up Prothro because we have new details now on when he's going to take his official visit to Georgia. And The cool thing about this is, obviously, Georgia getting a chance to host a player of this magnitude. That's pretty cool. But the other thing here is we're in it now when it comes to the class of 2026. Jeff Sintel reporting that Prothro going to take his official visit to Georgia March 22nd. So understand this, that when you come off of like December and the early signing period, it sort of seems like you're kind of like waiting for the next recruiting cycle to really kind of kick into gear. We've gotten used to a lot of these official visits taking place in June. That's going to be a very crowded month again for Georgia. We've already gotten early indications on that. But Prothro here taking an official visit to Georgia in like less than 3 weeks. So we really are now in the major part of the 2026 recruiting cycle. The warm weather season is basically here. We got time change coming up this upcoming weekend. After that, you got spring practice going. And then it's going to be like major visit time. You know, February is a dead period in recruiting now. So the coaches, as they should be, taking some vacation time and enjoying some time away from football. And frankly, I'm glad they get that time. But for those of us who are like addicted to the news cycle and always waiting for the next big piece of recruiting news to drop, you don't get a ton of that sometimes in February. But now February is over and it's back to work for everybody here. And the major news nuggets are about to start dropping here when it comes to this 2026 class, and Prothro taking his visit relatively early on in the process here, March 22nd, as reported by Jeff. That is certainly an example of that. We are in draft season now, and in draft season, there's always the prospect is rising and prospect is falling, and some of this stuff, we'll be honest, is a total media creation. It's one of the reasons why I don't always enjoy the pre-draft process. Some of it, however, is perhaps pretty real. And in the case of Jackson Dart, the former Ole Miss quarterback, you get the impression this might be somewhat real. That it seems like Dart, whether it be NFL Scouting Combine or Senior Bowl stuff, it seems like Dart is really making a name for himself. And there is chatter all over the place that all of a sudden that Dart may be working his way into a first-round conversation now. And perhaps he could be the second quarterback off the board. Cam Ward's going to be the first quarterback taken. It seems like, and once again, who knows how real this is, who knows how, manufactured this is, but it seems like Shedeur Sanders, the, I guess, sort of universally assumed number 2 quarterback in this draft, it seems like he's dropping, on draft boards a bit. And some of this kind of comes down to, I think the phrase you hear sometimes is, what is his elite trait? Does Sanders necessarily have one? I won't pretend to be a scout on that. I won't necessarily weigh in on that particular aspect of the conversation, other than to acknowledge that there seems to be some pretty heavy scrutiny of Shedeur Sanders right now, that he might be slipping just a bit at the same time that a guy like Jackson Dart is climbing up the ladder here. A very good athlete who's proving himself to also be a pretty accurate quarterback. So Dart may be on his way up. Now, the flip side of this is, because we do this, those of us who are obsessed with college football, anytime we're having a draft conversation, like, for instance, the Georgia offensive linemen performed well this weekend, the question comes back to, well, how come they weren't better during the year? Fair question to ask. In the case of Jackson Dart, if he really does become a first-round quarterback, and you think about all the success that Ole Miss had from the transfer players they brought in on defense, and yet this team still lost 3 games, a loss to Kentucky, probably keeping it out of the college football playoff. If you think about that, I mean, you are left to wonder, boy, did Ole Miss really miss its window? And some of y'all know I've not always been the biggest Lane Kiffin fan, a little bit skeptical of him as a coach, certainly trying to be as objective as I can be on this. My gosh, man, you had the roster. You were ready to go, and we saw it with our own eyes, those of us who were in Oxford back in November. That was a really, really tough Ole Miss team, a really tough Ole Miss team, a very, very good Ole Miss team that perhaps could have made some real noise in the college football playoff. They just lost too many games to give themselves a chance to be there. And all of a sudden now you think not only did you have the great transfers on defense, but you maybe even had like QB2 overall for the 2025 NFL draft. You still lost 3 games. I mean, trust me, Lane Kiffin has to be thinking about this. Will he ever have it set up that well ever again? Will he ever have that good of a chance to kind of be back in that conversation? It doesn't always work out quite so well for you. Steve Sarkisian had some interesting comments. He was at the NFL Scouting Combine, and he was chatting and talking. And one of the things that comes up for him is the fact that they have the big non-conference game coming up this season against Texas. I should say against Ohio State. Sarkisian saying, I love the opportunity. I think it's great for our players in summer workouts and training camp to know that we're getting ready to go play such a big game. He says the task at hand. He says, I think now with the expanded playoffs, as long as we don't punish those teams for going to play those games, then it's great for college football. So in other words, he's like, hey, if we lose, I don't want it to count. If we win, it's great. If we lose, I don't want it to count. And there's an aspect of this just sort of flies all over me. For Steve Sarkisian, like, how easy do you need your schedule to be? You know, you've already been gifted for 2 years in a row now, essentially the easiest SEC schedule of any of the contending teams. All of a sudden now you can't play any tough non-conference games either. And this is a relevant discussion because, like, in the future, there is all this chatter about the playoff expanding and then going to, you know, basically 4 guaranteed bids for the SEC and the Big Ten, but those 2 leagues would still play each other in non-conference games. Well, do the math in your head for a moment. If you've got the guaranteed bids going to 4 Big Ten, 4 SEC teams, these non-conference games against each other, those are basically just exhibitions. Those are basically games that don't have any real ramification because the thing we believe that's going to determine your actual playoff status is your win-loss record within conference. So what's the point of playing the games if they don't matter? And I'd say the same thing to Sarkisian here. In a real world that was just and fair, which is obviously different than the world we actually live in, a program like Texas might actually need a win against Ohio State to justify its playoff status, just given how, compared to teams like Georgia and others, how weak the Texas schedule sort of is. But that's obviously not the case. The committee has shown you time and time again that it doesn't have any ability to make kind of qualitative assessment of who's, you know, actually the better team. All they do is simply count losses, and the fewer losses, the better. So Texas thrived very well in that world a year ago, so much so that, you know, they had a chance to even advance past Georgia, who obviously beat them twice. So when Sarkisian's like, hey, I'm excited about playing Ohio State, but hey, don't punish us if we lose. Gosh, you know, how many built-in advantages do you have to have in order for you to feel good about your season, I guess? Interesting comments from Steve Sarkisian. A couple other short ones here. Hugh Freeze, sad news coming out of Auburn. He's been diagnosed with, I guess, a form of prostate cancer. This has apparently been detected early. It does not seem like it's going to take him away from the job. Seems like the prognosis for treatment is really, really good. Scary situation, especially, you know, I mean, gosh, you know, we all got to take care of our health. And that's just one thing, you know, we get wrapped up in the day-to-day, you know, life and stuff like that, but we got to take care of our health. And I'm saying that to myself as much as anybody else. Got to take care of ourselves here. So it sounds like Hugh Freeze detects this early. It sounds like the treatment for him is going to be okay, and we are certainly happy to hear that. Obviously a scary thing anytime you use the word cancer in a headline. And unfortunately, that was the situation for Hugh Freeze, so prayers for him on that. And then finally, West Virginia becomes the latest program. You know, Rich Rodriguez has returned to Morgantown as head coach after a stint there in the early 2000s, and they have now also canceled their spring game. The best I can tell, they didn't even give much reason for it. You know, Matt Rule cited tampering. Steve Sarkisian cited fatigue on the part of his players. You know, it seems like there's a lot of different reasons being cited as a mask for what the real reason might be. And the best I can tell for West Virginia, they didn't even cite much of a reason. They just said we're not doing it. So Georgia, G-Day lives on. We're happy about that. It's going to exist, but boy, you still have to be a little nervous for those of us who like this tradition in college football. The fact that so many other programs are getting so eager to want to just lob them off, and now not even feeling much of a motivation to even explain why. Pretty tough times for those of us who like college football the way that it's been. West Virginia, the latest example of that. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So we told you earlier, Georgia fans having a great time with the fact that Georgia got another win against Texas in Austin, and the fact that Georgia has been so cruel to these Longhorns. since they have come into the SEC. Let's give you a golden shoe with that in mind today. Our buddy Dawg in Houston, who's actually Matt Rukavina. Some of you know that name from our Facebook and DawgNation.com comment sections. He writes in to say, BA, is this golden shoe material or is it a little too PG-13 for the show? It comes to us via Message Board Geniuses. And what it is a Message Board Geniuses sort of steal message board posts and kind of put them on social media and get a big reaction from it. And so somebody on Orange Bloods, which is the big Texas message board, talked about a Texas fan essentially said that they are Georgia's B word. He says, I know it's quite early in SEC play, but if we're looking for a new villain, a lot seems to be fitting the bill so far with Georgia. So we'll cover up the B word there, but we'll give a golden shoe. And listen, we're maybe more family friendly. Sometimes we even need to be, but we're always going to err on the side of being family friendly. But that doesn't mean we can't spot a funny message board post when we see it. And Texas admitting they might be Georgia's you-know-what certainly is pretty funny. So we'll give Matt Rukavina, Dawg in Houston, a golden shoe for that. Message Board Geniuses, too, for unearthing it. And Texas, glad to see they know what's up when it comes to Georgia and Texas in the early days of the Longhorns being in the SEC. Another rival that Georgia's pretty hard on here, too, those lousy, stinking Gators. About 1,577 days. That is how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia in football. It's our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on that. All right. We'll take some Facebook comments here for a moment, and then we'll bounce around the rest of the comment sections. We'll see what's on everybody's mind. Husband says, "Go Dogs, horns down." I like the username now. That's pretty funny stuff. Kirk Schultz also having some expense, what he calls the short horns. You love to see that. Philip Jordan Wells having some fun in here too. All of that is great. All of that is great. Jacob O'Neill says, "Ain't nobody want any West Virginia players," which very well might be true. Kirk Schultz also sending prayers for Hugh Freeze. Yeah, indeed, that's the case. Scary stuff, man. You just nothing good comes from not thinking about your health. I reckon. Some of us don't always like to think about that, but nothing good comes from not thinking about it, unfortunately. And Gary Holt says, "This is one of those mornings where you feel like you can run a 40-yard dash in about 20 minutes. Need some more coffee." Well, listen, I have those mornings sometimes too, so hopefully we'll give you a jolt of what you need here on the program today, Gary. Hopefully that's the case. Bill Sanders reporting that Sean Murphy, the Braves catcher, is going to be out 4 to 6 weeks with a cracked rib. He got hit on Friday afternoon in the Grapefruit League game. Obviously no more Travis d'Arnaud for Atlanta. So catching depth going to be tested pretty early here. Neil Calvino on the horns down thing. Yeah, there was some sort of horns down thing in basketball earlier this year. I don't know if that was Calipari or not, but there was some sort of horns down thing that happened. I got to tell you, horns down, it's been kind of nice to have that in my life. I don't have great finger dexterity, so I don't do horns down very well, but it's been good to have horns down in my life. I've kind of enjoyed that. All right, let us see what else. No, some of these Facebook comments can't quite read. D. Nelly over here on YouTube also disappointed that d'Arnaud's no longer in Atlanta. Yeah, when you lose Murphy for a stretch, the absence of d'Arnaud, and listen, you can't. That's a lot of depth at one position. You're going to have a hard time. It was a huge luxury to have a guy like d'Arnaud essentially as your backup catcher. But now you're going to really miss him, no doubt about that. Let us see what else. TC California likes hearing the responsibility taken by the players here. And as I said before, I'm not going to make the people who have wanted to put some of it on the coaches. I'm not going to make them necessarily feel bad about that. it's not an invalid opinion to say, hey, maybe the coaching could have been better. It's not necessarily the point of view I've shared, but I'm not here to tell you that's a completely invalid opinion. I'm not going to call you like the lunatic fringe or something like that for feeling that way. I'm just simply not going to do that. I'm going to respect your opinion more than that. But I do think there is also an alternate point of view other than, always just, sort of resorting back to blaming the coaches. And no matter where you happen to be on that particular argument, the fact that there seems to be union around the need for improvement, I at least think you take some comfort in that. At least I hope you do. Jonathan Aaron says, if you could pick one college head coach to be our new offensive coordinator, who would it be? Kind of gets on my nerves sometimes based on what we just said a moment ago. But I do think that Steve Sarkisian is a really good play caller. I do. I thought he was remarkable for Alabama in 2020. Remarkable. Spencer Clark says, Jonathan put me on blast. I mean, I'm really not. I would say I'm a somewhat defender of the status quo simply because it's still pretty good. And, listen, a lot of times, the hire that you might make, if you did feel like you need to make a hire, there's really no guarantee it's going to be an improvement. I mean, sometimes it's not. So, the reason why I'm a defender of the status quo is because I would say the current situation is more good than not. That change doesn't always work out the way you think that it could. And Georgia's still pretty short removed from a period of unprecedented success. Like, I'm not in too big of a hurry to topple the apple cart, just given how well the program overall has performed. But as we've said, if you're kind of still back here in the same spot a year from now, it's a much different conversation. It just is. D. Nelly pointing out the darnos with the Angels now. And, for all the attention that the Dodgers get, Angels still probably spend more than people realize. Both those LA teams spending a good bit of money. And really for a while, Dodgers, Angels, Padres, I think San Diego's spending less now than they used to. But those teams out west were all spending pretty good money, pretty big bucks. All right, let's see what else. Bill Shirley says, how many teams are going to be sluggish from not having a spring game? Yeah, you kind of wonder. I mean, I don't know how valuable the game itself actually is. I mean, I do think making too much of the individual performances in the game is perhaps a mistake. I think that's probably true. But I think spring practice culminating in a spring game is probably, I think the entire thing probably adds together. In other words, because a lot of these teams don't even want to do spring practice either. Spring game impacts us, but they don't want to do spring practice either. And if that be the case, it's definitely not about tampering. That the whole blaming it on tampering thing is a little bit of a false front for what the actual problem really might be, which is they just don't want the players to know where they stand on the depth chart. But if you're willing to coach your team without fear of repercussion, the way that Georgia is, when you have the spring practice and we hear these rumors of, so-and-so's doing pretty well, whispered about this, whisper about that. And then when the G-Day also confirms that, or public remarks from Kirby Smart in some ways confirms that, boy, things get really interesting at that point, don't they? And so that's what we like. It's the way in which the spring practice gets paired with the spring game that makes it really good. Alan Hampton says, BA, enjoy those kids. Countless hours and dollars traveling and coaching my two boys. Won multi-state championships and 2 Southeastern regionals. Absolutely no regrets. Yeah, I don't know that we're going to be winning any Southeast regionals or anything like that, but we have a blast. It's just fun. And that's one thing my wife and I talk about a lot is whether it be my daughter with the things she's into, my son with the things he's into, it's just good to see them having fun. And, you try to keep the right perspective about everything because, when you're playing sports, there are ups and there are downs. There's good, there's bad, there's, it's just going to be a kind of a mixed bag of results. And honestly, nothing teaches life lessons like that. It really doesn't. Really does. And it does just take up a lot of time. It really does. But the alternative is, as you kind of point out, well, if you weren't doing this, what would you be doing? And honestly, I don't do well with idle time. I don't really want my kids to have idle time. I like schedule and structure. I like the fact that sports gives that. And honestly, it feels like a great blessing to be able to have sports in your life, because there's a lot of things that have to go right for you, health-wise and relationship-wise, things like that, to have the opportunity for sports. And so, hey, if you're lucky enough to play, you may be lucky enough. And that's kind of the way we try to think about that. Let's see what else. Oh, Wyatt Fielding asked, I was hoping somebody would bring this up. So if you're my age, one of the most important moments of my teenage years, I'm just telling you right now, and some of y'all hate this kind of stuff, so just give me like 5 minutes, maybe less than that. When Hulk Hogan turned heel and formed the NWO in 1996, I guess it would have been, I cannot tell you what a big deal that was in my life and the life of pretty much everybody around me. I remember, speaking of baseball, go to the baseball field. That is all anybody is talking about. It was a shocking thing when this happened in 1996. Hulk Hogan's going to be a bad guy now. Like the world shifted on its axis when that happened. Well, on Saturday night, spoiler alert, we got another one of those shocking heel turns. And I tell you what's funny about this is my kids have gotten to where they'll watch wrestling with me a little bit. They've never really, liked it all that much, although they like it more now. And so they've been kind of watching it with me a little bit last couple of years. But they've never really experienced a big heel turn. I don't even think we really knew this was possible, because in real life, we don't see a lot of heel turns in real life. People just sort of are what they are. But in wrestling, you can just change your personality just like that. And like my kids were shocked that John Cena betrayed Cody Rhodes and essentially sold his soul to The Rock, who also, I guess, had a little bit of a heel turn in the last year or so. This was like the Hogan thing all over again. And the backstory is, now I promise I'll make this very fast. The backstory is, so for a long time, John Cena was kind of the biggest star in the world for, honestly, decade plus, right? Like a huge, huge star for a long, long time. And after a while, people kind of got tired of the same character, same stuff over and over again. It just sort of never changed. And people kind of wanted him to sort of spice it up, turn heel, do something like that. Fans started cheering for his opponents. But from a business standpoint, even if the character was getting stale, they were selling so many T-shirts and things like that, they would have been idiots to end that gravy train. They were making so much money selling the Cena T-shirts. They came out with all these different designs, things like that. It was such a moneymaker. But they just allowed it to get stale because it would have cost them money to make the character more interesting. So Cena was like this really divisive figure for a long time, biggest star in the sport, the most hardcore plugged-in wrestling fans bored to tears. Well, now he's kind of coming back for his farewell tour. And, this is the time to get the pats in the back and the hugs and the kisses and do all the nostalgia stuff. And after 20 years of being a good guy, for the most part, Cena turned his back and attacked Cody Rhodes on Saturday night. This is really fun, man. If you're not watching wrestling, you're missing out. It was great. It was great. By the way, Alan Hampton says at 55 he could still do a backflip. I couldn't do a backflip at 15, but that's good to know. Wyatt also pointed out Georgia baseball now in the top 5 rankings this week. This is I think this is going to be a good team. I do think it's going to be a good team. I do think it's going to be a good team. By the way, Jerry Dog fan pointing out it's Herschel Walker. Speaking of staying in good health, 63rd birthday for Herschel Walker today. Boy, you're talking about a guy that's just in amazing physical condition. Amazing physical condition. And we had a nice time the other day talking about, I think his candidacy for the Pro Football Hall of Fame is probably better than it's given credit for. Let's see what else. Richard D is pointing out it's been 2,253 days since Texas beat the Georgia Bulldogs. Richard, I like that. Good to hear from you today. William Camacho says he was born in Oklahoma. I didn't know that about William. Let's see what else. DT also pointing out I'm not getting better at saying the 1,000 thing. Yeah, I mean, I try to listen to feedback, and people are right. It sounds better to say, typically speaking, when you're kind of communicating, fewer syllables probably better. A lesson I could learn in a lot of ways. But in this particular case, if you're wanting to make it sound really significant, sort of dragging it out and kind of saying it long form, probably the better way to do that. Garrison Tucker asks who has the most receiving yards in 2025. I would say that Georgia's leading receiver. I tell you, the buzz right now is around Noah Thomas. So if you give me the freedom to maybe change my mind later on, but based on what I think I know right now, I believe I'd show some love to Noah Thomas. That's the direction I might go. Randy Hall said he did a backflip recently, just not on purpose. Yeah, I had some of that before too. That is the case. I've never been particularly, flexible? I've never been particularly flexible, although I am certainly less flexible than I used to be. What else on DawgNation.com here for a minute? Still can't get over William being on DawgNation.com after a long stretch of being on Facebook. UJ Marine lives in Texas. Another one of those guys like our buddy Matt Rukavina that likes those wins against the Longhorns. I understand that. William Camacho also asked about our issues with Apple. Yeah, like the way podcasting works is when you do the show, it becomes a file, RSS feed, that spits it out to all the various platforms. And I would say that Apple's become a little bit of a finicky platform overall. But this is not necessarily Apple's fault. But it is one of those things that's become a problem. But I'd say within the week, we're going to have it fixed. Within the week, we should have it fixed. All right, final comments here. Let's bounce around here for a moment. Jonathan Aaron wondering if Cena will still wear the jean shorts. I'm assuming, I actually kind of wondered this too. I'm assuming it'll be same music, same look, just the different. It used to be if you turn heel as a wrestler, you either had to go bald or you had to get facial hair. Facial hair used to be the sign that you were a bad guy. That when you turn heel, you grew facial hair. I don't know if Cena does that. By the way, Cena's also got a little issue on the top of his head that some of us can relate to. But I don't know if we see a change in look or a change in music. I don't know. Sometimes that coincides with character change. I'm guessing probably not, but perhaps they do. Mike D says there are too many participation trophies on Facebook, which is very funny. Very funny stuff. Speaking of Facebook, let's see how they're doing one more time. By the way, speaking of heel turns, Bill Sanders, Jacob O'Neill accusing William Camacho of a heel turn on the Facebook side of things. Bill Sanders also thinks that Colby Young, if he does come back, which I believe he probably is going to, could be the leading receiver. You might be right about that. I think in the case of Colby, look, he defended himself in court. He brought facts into evidence. As far as I'm concerned, he's ready to move on with his life and be a member of the Georgia football team in good standing. I don't have any hesitation about that at all. I do think that big organizations have a tendency to use public relations even when they don't necessarily need it. And in this case, I believe that Georgia will probably execute some manner of public relation in how they bring Young back. It'll probably be quietly. I don't think they should have to be ashamed of it, or I don't think that Young himself, look, he was accused of something. He faced his accusation in court. He defended himself as his right under the law. And as far as I'm concerned, he is a citizen in good standing like anybody else is, as far as I'm concerned. But there'll probably still be some aspect of public – if Georgia is bringing Young back, there will probably be some aspect of public relations involved in how they choose to do that. Johnny Prescott asking about special plans for G-Day. I certainly know we'll have plenty more to say to you about that as we get closer to it. I'm certainly hopeful to be back in our home away from home, the UGA bookstore. I expect we'll probably at least be there. We'll see if there's anything else going on that day or not. Chastain Coleman asked a good question. You can only pick three between Atkinson, Curtis, Cantwell, Bowman, Hyder, and Cooper. Yes, see, I tell you who had me really thinking about Tyler Atkinson the other day was some of the stuff that Davin Bellamy said. Davin was really strong in his assessment of Atkinson. Not that I didn't already like him as a player, but hearing Davin on Atkinson the other day makes me like him better. I like Bowman a lot. And, I mean, no disrespect to Curtis, but given the fact that you didn't really win with, like, as many of the big offensive linemen in the last cycle, boy, Cantwell would be huge too. That's a great question, Chastain. Great question. Great question. Bill Sanders thinks that what they're doing right now is just and this is wrestling, a rehash of the McMahon Corporation angle from 25 years ago. I don't necessarily, let's see where it goes. I mean, I feel like the wrestling storytelling has been pretty good lately. Ken Hogan pointing out that some of the stuff, Herschel Walker, like obviously, he says, I remember the Sports Illustrated when it featured, and he says he didn't lift weights, but he did push-ups with his wife sitting on his back, as well as other resistance exercise. He also said he was fueled by nothing but McDonald's. Yeah, I mean, that is a lot of God-given good genes, I reckon. I reckon that's the case. Foster Moss asked what the best wrestler entrance. Hard to beat the glass breaking. I mean, listen, I like a lot of them. But that glass breaks. That crowd goes crazy, and Stone Cold comes out. It's hard to beat that. Simple as it is. Just love the reaction. But obviously, Undertaker, Ric Flair, there are a lot of good ones. The Wolf showing some love for Garrison Hurst. Hey, Wolf, I got no problem with that. The Wolf also agrees with me that Steve Austin has the best entrance. Then Undertaker, then Ric Flair, then Orton. That's interesting. Then The Rock. I like most of that list for sure. That glass breaks, though, man. Pandemonium. I love it. Hey, fun conversation. Thanks for letting us do that. Just a little bit of fun to kind of mix in with everything else. Y'all get ready to have a great day. Check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. By the way, this is that time of year. It's warm, it's cold. Heating and air. You got them both going in a lot of days. And if you're worried about your system not working as well as it could, our friends at RS Andrews can make sure that's not the case. You can find them online, rsandrews.com, whether it's your heating system or your AC unit. They'll get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs for you. They'll make sure it's running as well as it could. All of that online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. Back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.